All right.
Too dark? Want a little light, or is that good?
No, that's probably good. Yeah. Well, welcome everyone. I'm pleased to be here, and it's the story I'm going to reveal tonight is kind of a 60-year journey in natural history that I've been on, and several of my colleagues and friends in the room have shared a lot of it with me. But it really, it's been great. And, you know, we live in a wonderful part of the world, and it's just really appreciative to understand the wildlife and everything that's around us. So, so with that, we'll kind of go. And most of the photographs that I took won't necessarily be in focus, but I have several friends that actually have cameras that do that. But this is a swamp pink over at Tom Swamp Causeway. But anyway, fun stuff. And I don't know anything about plants really, but the rest of the stuff I'm okay with. So really, this is about Kathy, and she was a dear friend and colleague, and an excellent educator on natural history stuff. And it really was a loss to us all when she passed. But she had great enthusiasm and knowledge of the natural world, and a great way to express that, especially to young people. So we really, it was a great loss to us all when she passed. But her memory lives on in many of us. But birds, you know, for most of us in the natural history field, birds were kind of the starting gun kind of thing. And this picture I happened to take out in Truro, and you know, one of those magical things that you're there, you're walking in the forest, and you hear this kind of odd barking of geese, and it's a little bit different sound than Canada's. And to look up and see these magnificent snow geese flying overhead, you know, it's just kind of a really magical moment. And I've had this kind of experience several times. I had one time leading a group at Petersham Center, and the same thing kind of happened. You hear this odd sounding goose flock and look up, and there are these beautiful snow geese cruising by. Well, my journey into the natural history world really goes back to my 8th grade science teacher, Bob Coyle. He's the one that really kind of lit the flame. There was a lot of spark going on before that, but he got the flame going. And really, it happened to a lot of people. Several people in the room I know were also influenced. And, you know, to this day, if I go to the grocery store or get gas or something, you know, people bring up different stories about what they're seeing for wildlife and birds. And it's really rewarding that everybody in this community, you know, really had a jump start to other people in the region. And just to let you know, I haven't changed a bit. You know, that's where I am in 1966, and you know, I was a pretty handsome dude at the time. But this was Bob Coyle's car, and he used to like put all these people in one vehicle and take us after school on field trips and stuff, which you couldn't really do today. You know, we'd stack them in the back like cordwood, but we go all over the place around the local area, and we also took field trips to Plum Island and to Manomet Observatory in the Cape and all kinds of other places. And you know, this is, if you people here earlier, this is Chris Coyle. He's now retired, so just to give you a time frame. But in fact, everybody's retired there. But anyway, it was a great start, and it gave us all a good propulsion into the natural world. And the backyard is one of the places we start. Back in the old days, this would have been a tree swallow and not a bluebird. We didn't have any bluebirds back in the early 60s. They weren't here at all. Very rare sightings. And with people putting together the boxes and doing the work to actually provide nesting sites for bluebirds, their population is doing very, very well. We got rid of the DDT, we got rid of a few other things, and bluebirds have responded very well. Back in the 60s, this would have been occupied by a tree swallow. Now the opposite is happening with tree swallows. They're getting more and more scarce as all insect-eating birds are actually showing quite dramatic signs of decline. So we have positives and negatives all the way down the line. And we're just talking about winter bird feeding. It'll be coming sooner than you think, probably. But anyway, we really do enjoy bringing birds close into our backyards and into our, near our homes, and enjoy watching them from the comfort of our living rooms. But as you get into birding a little bit more, you actually start to get out in the field and look at different things. This is an ovenbird, and it's a warbler that looks like a thrush, but it's a miniature guy. And back when I was doing a lot of birding on the coast, we had CB radios, and my handle was ovenbird, because just that loud guy from the forest, and it goes teacher, 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 teacher as it sings away. But we really get into looking at all the different types of birds. And one of the real things about birding is that we actually start to keep lists and keep track of what we're seeing and whatnot, and you wind up with a year list. What birds have we seen this year? And what birds have we seen in our life? And we keep these lists going. And generally you're looking for things that are uncommon, out of season, out of the normal range. And then we learn about these things through rare bird alerts. And then now we have the new thing called eBird, which really helps us to do that. And eBird is a great citizen science tool. And you're able to keep lists and actually submit photographs and sound recordings to Cornell University. Then they keep track of it all. And all that information is being used by scientists to look at the distribution and the timing of different birds around the country and around the world now. But, so eBird is one of the tools that I use quite often when I'm looking at birds. But when you get a bird like this one, the red-footed falcon, this is a European bird that wound up in Martha's Vineyard. And I happen to be sitting in my office in New Salem when I was working for DCR, and I got an email from a friend that said that this bird was out at Katama at Martha's Vineyard. And I had to just turn to my boss and say, see ya, I'm out of here. And I called a friend on the vineyard, and they picked me up at the ferry, and we went out to take a look at this, and we actually got to see this bird. This is not my picture, but it's just a marvelous bird. It's like a kestrel, very much in that same size, and we watched it for an hour or so as it hawked around this airfield, catching dragonflies, pulling the wings off in midair, and swallowing the body, and you see just the wings flying everywhere. And so that was like the first day it was been seen, or the second day. It was like a Wednesday or something. And by the weekend, a few other people had heard about it. And this is what can happen when you have a really rare bird show up. And people came from, it was like the first U.S. record, and people came from all over the country to do this. And as a side note, there was another in the same group. There was a bird like this called the bat falcon, and Ernie LeBlanc and Jeff Johnstone and Bob Mallet and I flew to Texas and actually saw the bat falcon, which is very similar to this, down in Texas. So we got succumbed to that little bit of stuff too. But again, this can happen when you have a really interesting rare bird show up. But we have lots of regular birds. This is a black-throated blue warbler, and every May or so, late April, early May, these will start to show up, and it's the beginning of that season where I kind of transfer from looking at birds all winter and stuff, and I start to look at other things as the spring moves on. The technology is all over now. We use cameras a lot now. This is a trail camera. I did quite a lot of bird recording. This is I had a Marantz recorder in this, and I was doing breeding bird surveys where I'd actually record for 3 minutes, and then I'd take this back to my desk with an amplifier and headphones and actually listen to all the recordings, and then using, at the time it was Dragon Naturally Speaking, one of these voice to print things, and it would type out the bird name, and I would, as I talked into the microphone, as I heard things, and that stuff was pretty cool. And then after that, I wound up getting this a remote audio recorder, which you can set up to go off at different times of the day or night. And like I'd have it go on for 3 minutes, like at 4:30 in the morning, at 5 in the morning, at 5:30 and 6, maybe once in the middle of the day, and again at dusk. And again, I'd take all that home and I'd put it in the computer and listen to the headphones and identify all the birds. And this too became a little bit obsolete. And now everything's at our fingertips and on your phone. And has anybody here tried Merlin? Yeah, you know, it's like, I mean, it's probably the most popular outdoor app I've ever heard of. I mean, people all over the place are using it. The cautionary tale is that you can't always believe Merlin, you know, but it's getting better and better all the time, and the more people use it, the better it learns. So as we progress through this, it's pretty good. And if you want to just know a little bit more about what's going on, this particular one over here, now you get a bird feeder with a camera, and it'll actually go to your phone and tell you what bird is at your feeder, you know, which is kind of interesting, you know, visually or audibly. And then this little box down here is an audio recorder, and it too will identify what birds are being recorded. So you can set that one up like I did with that machine that I had to listen to, and this will record at particular times of the day or whatever, and you can, you know, make a good record of what's happening around your yard. For those with a little bit extra cash, Swarovski now has a pair of binoculars for around $5,000 that will actually identify the bird you're looking at as you're looking at it. So, you know, people are going to some of these tropical places and stuff, and, you know, it's got like 5,000 birds that can identify inside the software of the binoculars. So technology is changing dramatically all the time. But when spring and summer come, I kind of tend to drift towards some of my insect friends. And these are some of the butterflies. This is, of course, our monarch. And then this is the Gulf fritillary, which we see from the mid-Atlantic states southward. It's also a migratory butterfly, only with a much shorter migration than the monarchs. But the whole idea of studying butterflies really started back in the mid-'80s. Again, I was working at Quabbin at the time, and Brian Cassidy came and gave a presentation to the staff, the senior staff at Quabbin, and said he wanted to do a butterfly atlas. And I said, sounds good to me, you know, and myself and Butch Trink and a few others, Butch Labrie and a few others actually looked at the butterflies in this area. And back in those days, I didn't have a camera, and we were netting butterflies and pinning them and doing all that sort of stuff, which none of us do anymore because we don't need to. And this is the group. This is actually Brian's right there. This is Brian Cassidy that ran that thing. Here we are on the Tom Swamp Causeway looking at a bog elfin. And this species of butterfly, a tiny little nondescript little brown guy, we actually, I was on a trip and we actually took photographs of the species, and then right around the same time, a professor at Harvard Forest actually looked at one and let it go, and then we realized after the 2 weeks when my film came back, because it was film camera, that we actually had a really rare species. Its nearest population that was known at the time was in Maine, and they live in sphagnum bogs and spruce bogs. So pretty cool thing to find. But again, I had to wait 2 weeks for my film to come back, you know, because, you know, you had to finish the roll of film too. You take these pictures, and you still got 20 pictures left. So you don't want to waste it doing that. Boy, digital cameras are so much better. Anyway, so that was a pretty cool find. And then, you know, some of my favorites, this is a Leonard Skipper. And it's like the last one to show up in the fall. And sadly, I haven't seen one now in a few years. And they're more common now on the Cape and in the coastal plain. But I haven't seen one locally. This is from my own yard. But my favorite butterfly is actually this one here. This is called the harvester. And this is our only carnivorous butterfly. And it actually, the nearest relative is in Africa. They figure it somehow migrated to South America and then moving its way up. What it's doing in this picture, this is a female laying her eggs in alder aphid colony. These are alder woolly aphids, these little white furry things. And she's laying her egg into that group of aphids. And when the caterpillar hatches from the egg, it'll start to eat the aphids. And it'll plow right through this whole thing. Well, simultaneously, there's actually ants that are actually nurturing the aphids. And the evolution of these butterflies, these larvae, is they set off a chemical pheromone that confuses the ant to not think it's an enemy. And so it's able to fool the ant into thinking it's okay as it goes ahead and chomps through all the aphids. So pretty interesting evolutionary dynamics. And then the adults don't feed on nectar either. They actually feed on the secretions of other aphids. So if you find, like in your yard, sometimes you get those orange aphids and stuff. I've had the harvester adult butterflies coming in and feeding on the secretions of the aphids. So the total life cycle is carnivorous. Cool stuff. But butterflies are just beautiful. And you know, these were taken up at Tully Dam. We all know that area. If you go down to where the disc golf area is, there's a wet area at the bottom. And, you know, we have silver-bordered fritillaries here. And this is, you know, I like these because they actually give you a field mark. If there's a black dot within this white one, you're in. It's a silver-bordered fritillary. So there's a lot of fritillaries, and they all look somewhat alike. But this is a bog copper that likes to be in places where cranberries are growing. And then the American copper is very ubiquitous. It's all over everywhere. And, but just a gorgeous little butterfly. And then we have some swallowtails. These are tiger swallowtails. We have at least two species here, the eastern tiger swallowtail and the Canadian tiger swallowtail. But what they are doing at this point are actually picking up minerals from wet soil. They don't chew. They have like a proboscis that's like a straw. And the males generally are picking up the minerals that they need for reproduction. So when you see these puddles, and sometimes you get 20 or 30 of these things all puddling together in a good spot. A lot of times where there's salt being used on the road in winter, those salts will be in the soil right there. And if it's a little bit of a wet spot, they'll come in and use that mineral source to augment their diet. But it's kind of like the boys at the bar. You know what I mean? They're getting all juiced up here. Well, you know, the whole idea with a lot of the stuff that we do is really focusing on native plants. You know, as we work in our own yards and stuff, we really be thinking about what we're planting today. Because we're really, there's so much going on in the world that isn't so great, but the things that we can do ourselves. And one of those things is to really start planting native species in your yard, including trees and shrubs and other plants. And this particular plant here is a spice bush. This is my granddaughter, and she's exploring a caterpillar right here in the spice bush. This is a spice bush swallowtail. And what it does is the caterpillar gets in there and it sews the leaf together and makes it roll up to make a nice little hiding spot for it during the day. And if you look at it really close, it looks like a little snake or something. You know what I mean? It's kind of a defensive mechanism. And you can see the silk here that he uses to pull that leaf together as a little shelter for it. And I bought this at a native plant garden, this shrub, and I got it probably in August and September. And the next summer, I had spice bush swallowtails on it. So, I mean, they will find it. They also will feed on sassafras, which is not as common where we are right up here, but if you go down the valley a little further, it's a fairly common native plant. but cool. But spice bush swallowtails. So moths and butterflies are all part of the Lepidoptera, which means scaled wings. And all the color that we see in butterflies and moths are due to those scales. And if you handle them a lot, the scales will rub off and whatnot. So we've learned not to have to handle them a lot. The photographs work great. But one of the big differences between the two groups is the antennas. And moths either have a feathery antenna like this that's used to receive chemical signals from like their mate, or they have a thread-like antenna, and they could be either one or the other. And then butterflies always have a clubbed antenna. So if you see a club on the antenna, you've got a butterfly and not a moth. And when you look at the taxonomy of that whole group, the butterflies are actually in the middle. And there's a lot of moths that are older and smaller, and a lot on the other side. So it's a man-made continuum. And we try to make things organized in our own heads, and so we do things. But some people just look at butterflies, some people look at moths. I look at everything. And for sure, some of the moths are just spectacular. This is the Luna. I've had as many as a dozen on my wall, a few years ago. Unfortunately, I have a lot less of them these days. I think the general biomass of moths has decreased, which is reflected in the number of birds that we are able to see, because the birds eat the bugs or whatnot. So we need to think about the whole process. But a lot of people, when you think about moths, are really thinking about the holes in their sweater, or the stuff that's happening in the pantry when they go to get their grain and it's got a bunch of weird stuff in it. But that's a very, very small percentage of all the different moths that are out there. There's probably as many as 5,000 or 6,000 or more moths in Massachusetts. And in my own yard, I've got almost 1,000, different species that we've discovered. So the moths that give us trouble are pretty minuscule. The ones that we know the most about are things like the gypsy moth, which is now called the spongy moth, to be correct, are really imported from other places. These were brought here they wanted to make silk or something when they first brought them over, but they escaped and really are all over the place, and it can cause a lot of damage because they're here without their natural predators. So we really want to be careful about importing insects and plants or anything else from other parts of the world, because it's really important that we really keep our animals in sync with where they come from. Everything evolves with their predators. And one of the cool predators I like is this warbler here. This is a black-throated green warbler. And, come, the 1st of May or so, we'll all be looking for these guys. And depending on our own weather patterns, sometimes it'll be a week early or a week late. But anybody that's been birding a lot will realize that in May, we get what you call warbler neck. Because you're sitting there, you're looking up into the treetops, into the oak tops, and you're getting a big cramp in the back of your neck from looking straight up all the time. And you're wondering what all these guys are doing up there. And, back in the old days, you'd look at a tree and we'd get 20 or 30 warblers of 10 or 15 different species. Now we're lucky to see 20 or 30 warblers of one species. But other than that, they're here and they're looking for something. And this is the fuel that really gets migration rolling. These are caterpillars that are actually looking like little pieces of stick. Here's your caterpillar, there's a caterpillar. And I learned that some of these caterpillars actually overwinter in this stage. And even in the coldest day, they'll shrivel up and just be there like a stick. And when it warms up, they start to move around again. And this time, as we get into winter, the chickadees and the nuthatches and the titmice, kinglets and such, will all be looking for these little remnant caterpillars. But the real action happens in spring as the oaks buds start to break. And there's more and more of these caterpillars. And this is the real fuel that makes the migration really happen. You know, this is what these birds are feeding on as they go from the tropics all the way up into Canada, many of them. And the concern by a lot of scientists is if we have very early springs where the buds break early, the warblers that are sitting down in Costa Rica or Belize or somewhere don't know that we had a warm, you know, April and things are moving quicker than they're used to. So we're worried about the interruption of the food source when they need it the most as they're doing their migration, which is very expensive in the energy consumption. And then just a few other caterpillars in the yard. You know, I get people that are planting pollinator gardens and stuff. You know, you get the complaint that they planted all these wonderful plants and something ate them. Well, that's kind of the point, you know. So these are just a few from the yard that they're just, you know, wonderful, obscure little moths and good stuff. Another thing we learned recently is that you can use an ultraviolet flashlight and go around your yard at night, and actually some of the caterpillars will glow. This is a slug moth, and it's pretty cool, really nice way to find them in the dark. And a lot of them are much more active at night when they don't have birds that are going to be feeding on them. But we have a lot of moths. I mean, these are just a few pictures from my yard. You know, like I say, I do this quite often. But they're just beautiful. They're diverse. And it's just the dynamics of all of this really makes it a lot of fun to see what will show up any given evening. And, you know, they're really spectacular. You know, I like these here. This is one of the underwing moths. You know, and it sits there with its wings are closed. It's almost invisible on the tree trunk. And if a bird comes and pokes at it, it opens its wings and it flashes that orange. And it's just enough to startle the bird, long enough for it to for the moth to escape. So, but again, I love the diversity. I never know what I'm going to find when I go out, you know, to look at my wall in the evening. And it's just a real fun activity. I was fortunate to spend some time in Arizona at the Southwest Research Station in Portal. And I was there with the American Museum of Natural History and took a full week-long course in Lepidoptera. And mostly it was on moths. And we had many different ways that we collected. This is a trap at the bottom, you know. And this was really good. This is back, you know, a bunch of years ago. But the only thing about these, we set these out in the desert, and the Border Patrol thought we were guiding planes in with drug running or something, you know. So we had a little explaining to do. But they let us go eventually. But it's just wonderful to be out in the desert and seeing different things. And there's the team set up there in the desert in Arizona. And it's just amazing. And I've been, again, around the country a bunch of times, and I always bring a light with me so I can set up, even outside my hotel room sometimes, just switch the bulbs and just into a black light bulb or something and get some moths. But most of the time, the hotel people don't notice. But if you're into this kind of stuff, every year in July, I have a party. It's called the Moth Ball. Everybody's invited. You know, this last year we had 70 people show up. We had, you know, setups of lights and bait all around the yard and on the neighbor's yard, and you know, we eat well and have a few beers, and you know, we were up till this year. I stayed up late. I was there until like 4 o'clock in the morning this year, and I don't usually try to stay up that late, but it was such a good time. But we're doing it, and here we are again with a portable setup, and you know, you can go anywhere now, and there's some really cool equipment, and I can set up anywhere at all now without needing, you know, big electric power or anything. So it's really kind of a lot of fun, and I can sample, you know, places I wouldn't normally get to see. So in my yard, you know, this is another thing. I actually put all of my sightings now in iNaturalist. And for anybody that's familiar with iNaturalist, it's a really cool app and program. And I take my pictures and I load them up onto iNaturalist, and it'll suggest an identification for you, right there on the spot. So, and you sometimes you'll have several choices. You got to kind of figure it out, and then you choose your best guess. I then usually look it up, the same species, on the Bug Guide or one of these other online moth photographers group. And if I'm pretty sure what it is, I submit it. And then later on, other people will look at this and tell you whether you're right or wrong, and and give you other suggestions on the identification. So with kind of a communal think tank kind of stuff, you actually get to the result. And when it's actually been confirmed by other people, it gets what they call research grade, and it goes these numbers up here. So I had 873 of the 923 species I submitted were confirmed as research grade. So I still have a few others. Some can't be down to species because a photograph can't get you the right part of the anatomy that you might need, but it's pretty good. And I only started this a few years ago, so I have a whole lot of stuff that I saw before iNaturalist that I haven't entered in yet. They said that you're supposed to do in the winter, but I haven't found the time then either. But I do everything in iNaturalist. I do birds. If you see, I've got there's a possum here. The gray fox has been coming around the last few days. My fountain in my just outside my window is a big hit these days. It's so dry out there, they don't have any water. So I have a nice little pool and fountain that's being visited by the possum, by the fox. The bear actually came by, took a drink, ignored my suet, which is the red pepper suet, which they're not supposed to like. But it's all kinds of things. I mean, I have, tree crickets and potter's wasps and spiders, and I kind of record all of this stuff in my yard, and I'm kind of what I do. But my real passion, for insects really is dragonflies. And these are some dragonflies from the fossil record. And some of these things, don't look any different than what we see today. One of the big differences is that some of these dragonflies were 18 inches to 2 feet wingspan. So you want to watch out for your cats and dogs. They're pretty ferocious. But anyway, so otherwise, besides the size being smaller now than they were in the fossil record, they're really diverse, and we're fortunate here in Massachusetts. We have about 140 species of dragonflies and damselflies, and so it's not an insurmountable number. When you look at birds, we have, you can see up to like 400 species in Massachusetts, and on moths, there's probably 10,000 things that you might see, and so this is a lot easier to grasp when you're only looking at 140. So anyway, so dragonflies, just so you know, hold their wings out horizontally at rest, and the damselflies put their wings up over their back at rest, and that's the basic tenet to tell you which book to look in, and that works really great until you get to the next group, and these are the spread wing damselflies that hold the wings back at a 45-degree angle. Just so there's a rule, and then there's the exception to the rule. But they're elegant and just beautiful. The structures and everything is just wonderful to watch and observe. And most of what we were learning, and again, I took another week course back in the 90s, 1989, I think it was, and I went to Maine in Steuben at the Eagle Hill Center up there and spent a week just doing dragonflies. And we learned all about the anal appendages. And that's what we learned. Back in those days, there were no field guides. All the books we had were these volumes that were about that thick, and it required a Sherpa to follow you around with this stuff. But it all had no color pictures. It was all about wing venation and anal appendages and that kind of stuff. And And that's how I learned my dragonflies. And it served me well. And we didn't learn common names then either. So I pretty much have all of these Latin names in my brain most of the time. But dragonflies are wonderful. This is the 12-spotted skimmer. And again, these guys act more like flycatchers. And they'll go out, catch some insect prey, bring it back to the perch. And as a photographer, you spend time looking at the perch and try not, you don't have to follow the dragonfly because he'll be back, and they'll often come back to the same perch, which allows you to get a good look at them. This is the 12-spotted skimmer. And one thing that I was going to say, these little light bars here, this is, and on the body, this is still maturing. When it becomes fully mature, this will turn all white, and it's what we call pruinosity. And pruinosity comes from the term, like you see in a plum, where you get that waxy white coating on the plum. And as this animal matures, that waxy coating will grow and obscure the underlying brownish and yellow colors on the abdomen, and it turn a nice white. Common green darners. Again, this is another one of our major species that we see here. They're big and they're robust. They come out end of April or 1st of May. Interesting about these guys is that some of these will actually breed here in our North Quabbin ponds and actually leave this pond in the fall and fly all the way south to the Gulf of Mexico and maybe for places further south out over the ocean, out of the Gulf. And others will just reproduce right here and stay here. So it's an interesting conundrum of trying to figure out their life cycles. But now the scientists can actually catch a dragonfly in Louisiana, and by doing chemical analysis, they can tell what part of the globe it came from by the isotopes that they have. So they're a product of where they come from. So they grow in one particular area, and those chemical signals can be read, so you can tell where things actually came from. So you don't have to have a transmitter on it to know that it came from somewhere else. And again, we captured all of my dragonflies when I was all my early years, and I still use a net and capture them. But nowadays with your phone and stuff, you don't need to keep the dragonfly. You can hold on to it, take a few pictures, and this is an actual heritage record of the spine-crowned clubtail that I took over near Birch Hill Dam, and I was able to release this animal unharmed, and we still have that record for the Natural Heritage Program. And so it's really, we've come a long ways. So the more we learn, the more we know we can actually be non-consumptive in our observations. So we get a little bit into the life history, and these are shells of the larval dragonfly. They pull themselves out of the water, and then they're done with this part of it. But we can identify these to species, and it's really great because we know at this point what body of water these dragonflies came from. And we could use that in a lot of ways. We can use it to tell the water quality. We could learn a lot about its environment by which species are in a particular body of water. And these shells don't go unused. You see there's a spider, kind of dropped in here, and it's, habitating these spent shells. But nothing goes to waste in nature. So a little bit of the life history in some of these dragonflies. There are 3 different ways that dragonflies lay their eggs. And the big problem with dragonflies and reproduction is that they're trying to avoid being eaten by fish. When your eggs or your larvae are in a little pool, they're really tasty, nourishing little morsels for any kind of fish or pollywog or whatever. So there's devices that the dragonflies have evolved to figure this out. So this top one are damselflies, And most of the damselflies and a lot of the darners actually have like a little can hook, a can opener type hook on the end of the abdomen where they can slice into some vegetation and then lay their egg in the vegetation. And then when the larva hatches, it drops out into the water. So it goes through the whole egg stage without being eaten by fish or other things. And, so they do this in the water or over the water, whatever. And the more common thing that we see in most of the bigger dragonflies, like this amberwing, is there's a cluster of eggs on the tip of the abdomen, and she'll fly over the water and dip her abdomen into the water with thousands of eggs, and they kind of overwhelm the habitat with the eggs so that the fish can't eat them all. So in this first incident, they're very particular, don't provide as many eggs, but they're safer, and these guys are kind of overwhelming the habitat. And then this is a spiketail, and they're interesting way to do it. They hold their abdomen at a 90-degree angle, and this spike pokes holes in the wet mud, and then they drop the eggs into the hole in the wet mud. And again, the egg gets able to sit there and hatch out without being eaten by anything. So, the three different strategies for survival of dragonflies. So the larval dragonflies in the water, this is kind of what a lot of them will look like. They have a big, what we call a labium, a big tongue basically that kind of flips out and grabs things like you would see in a frog. Sometimes you've seen that. It goes out and they're wicked fast, and they're voracious predators. They really eat a lot of mosquito larvae and a few other things. And in all parts of the life cycle, these guys are top predators. So eventually, after it gets in the water for a while, it's time to emerge. And these larvae will come up on a rock or whatever at the edge of the water and start the process of becoming an adult. And the back splits open, and the dragonfly starts to pull itself out of the shell. A face a mother could love, isn't it? You see these tubes here are actually the tracheal tubes, and this is going from gills that were on the larva, now they're going to be lungs in the adult. So it's quite a process. Then it just basically blows itself up. It just pushes liquid through all the veins and all, things that just keep getting bigger and bigger. Sometimes bad things can happen away from a boat, or a storm or something. They get up and they're not high enough away from the body of water, and they can get washed over, and this dragonfly isn't going to make it, because once that's interrupted, they become bird food, basically. But if all goes well, this is what happens. This is an adult rusty snaketail that was behind Bruce's house here, Pan's house, down in Miller's River. That whole sequence was there. And these guys come out, they'll dry off for a few hours or to a day, and this is their most vulnerable state. This is a prime choice meal for a red-winged blackbird or a kingbird or whatever, and they're very vulnerable here. So at this point, as soon as they're able to get going, they fly up into the treetops and get away from the edge of the water. And really, on some species, you don't see them again for several weeks. They're up in the treetops, and you don't ever see them near the water until they're fully, hardened off and are able to fly on their own. I do remember being out in that body of water in the Miller's River, and after a few weeks, they come down and they're the scatter egg kind of group, but they come down and they'd be laying eggs on the water, and I'm trying to catch one, and the trout got 3 of them before I got one, But anyway, it's fun to watch them. But those larval thing is really important. There's a new book out now that gives you the details of all of these different larval this is what we call the exuvia, or whatever, when you see that shell. And you can identify the species, all of these things. And again, it gives us a good tool to figure out what's going on. Here's a beaver lily pad clubtail just emerged from its shell. But see this shell? It's got really a long, long abdomen. And if you look at it, you know, it's pretty easy to say what it is. You know what I mean? So some of them are a little less cryptic, but we learn a lot from just seeing the whole life cycle. And the thing I like about them is that they're pretty durable. So, you know, you can catch a dragonfly and hold its wings over its back and pass it around to kids and have them look at it. And I'm a firm believer in the tactile senses, that if a kid actually gets to feel something, it isn't on a computer screen, it isn't, you know, it's there. And they can feel it. You when you're ready to let it go, you put it on the finger, and they can feel the legs and the little barbs on the legs and stuff. And it makes an impression, no matter how old a kid you are. And this is how you spend an August afternoon. I mean, this is out on the Millers River, out by the Environmental Center, and you know, it's 85, 90 degrees out. You know, wading in the river is really a great way to spend the day. And being in the Northeast, we have a plethora of great field guides and stuff. And this is the newest guide right here. This is Ed Lamb's Dragonflies of North America. That just came out in October. And it's absolutely amazing book. It covers the whole North America for dragonflies. He also wrote this book on the damselflies of the Northeast. Again, being in New England, we're lucky. It's out of print at the moment. We're hoping it gets back in print. And our own Massachusetts wildlife agencies have put together the dragonflies and damselflies of Massachusetts. And again, this is available at any Fish and Wildlife field office. So we're lucky to deliver what we do. And I've been fortunate to travel around the country looking at dragonflies. This is the Dragonfly Society of the Americas. This particular group was in Virginia. You know, that's a lot of folks looking at bugs. And this is when I went to Oregon. And this is a big, huge valley. That grassy marsh thing went for miles. And everywhere you walked, there was probably about 8 to 12 inches of water standing in the stuff. And it was just loaded with dragonflies. And this lady here, Shelley and I went to Louisiana to meet some friends. And I just, for the heck of it, I went online and Googled dragonflies, Louisiana, and one name popped up. You know, it was this Mr. Strickland. And so I sent him an email. And lo and behold, very soon afterward, I got a phone call. And he's saying, "You're coming to Louisiana to look at dragonflies?" I said, "Yeah, well, we're here." So him and his wife picked us up at the Baton Rouge Airport Hotel and carted us all over, you know, Louisiana and Alabama and stuff. And we saw all kinds of wonderful things. And so it was a great introduction. But so there's not a lot of them around the world, but you know, we do have a good appreciation. So we all have done a lot lately with pollinator gardens and stuff. And again, really what our big message for that is really planting natives and really trying to make sure that we're augmenting what's happening in our own yards. We're trying to get rid of just lawns. You know, lawns don't really serve much of a purpose unless you're playing kickball. But otherwise, we're trying to enjoy our pollinators. And we have some pretty good, you know, resources nowadays to figure out what you're looking at. But that's a whole nother talk. We could talk about what to plant and what to do it, but we'll do more of that as we go forward. And this is a golden digger wasp. And again, this is a predator of caterpillars. And they'll go ahead and grab one of those caterpillars like I showed you earlier and actually excavate a hole in a sandy spot and put the caterpillar in the hole. Makes it it numbs the caterpillar but doesn't kill it, and lays its eggs on the caterpillar, which the young hatch and eat the live succumbed caterpillar. Pretty gross, actually, but they do help control pests, you know. So what if you don't have any plants? You know, we kind of overlook some of those habitats that aren't vegetated, and people will look at this. I just saw something on the, you know, on the thing where they said, well, you know, you could put 10,000 solar panels on the Sahara Desert, and you could light half the world. Well, this isn't a vacant habitat. There are things that live here. So just because it doesn't seem habitable to humans doesn't mean that it isn't pretty valuable as a habitat. And so tiger beetles are one of the species that I really like and look for every year in these sandy open habitats. And we only have about 14 species. Again, if you think about it, you know, birds are 400, you know, now we're getting down to some bite-sized taxa that you can kind of really get to learn. And this is the six-spotted tiger beetle, the Cicidella sexcutata, which is probably a more commonly encountered. Anybody that's walked on a trail in the woods see these bright green iridescent tiger beetles running along. They're wicked fast. They have wicked cool jaws. Look at the long legs. This is the festive tiger beetle, but you know they have really long legs. They can run fast, and look at the jaws, you know, and just ferocious. And they spend most of the time running down ants. So I mean, it's really really cool. I was just working with a person that they're trying to find out the speciation of the big sand tiger beetle, which is the next group. This one here, Formosa, and this again is one of the larger of the tiger beetles, but they think there's subspecies in different parts of Massachusetts. So we're out in Montague and out in the valley looking for these, and then they actually took some DNA specimens for that, and they're trying to figure out if the ones on the coast are the same, the ones that are on the inland Montague Plains, or if they've diverged enough to actually become different subspecies or species. But here's a couple others. This is Rapanda. You know, this is very common along riverbanks. You know, particularly in the late summer, you get the water goes down. They really like those intertidal, areas. And then Scutellaria. Again, I just like these guys. Again, there's only a handful, 14 different species that are there. And, reptiles and amphibians. And again, all of these different things have happened in different decades of my life as I went through this. And I do something for a while, then somebody else is working on something. Oh, that looks interesting. So I really started getting into reptiles and amphibians. And there's no relation between reptiles and amphibians. They're in total different, realms. I mean, the reptiles are more related to birds than they are to amphibians and whatnot. So anyway, we're going to look a little bit at some of our reptiles and amphibians. One of the common ones that we see is the red eft. If anybody that hikes in the woods on a damp day, sometimes they're so abundant you don't know where to walk, and that's a terrestrial form of the red-spotted newt, which is what we find in the ponds around here. Any body of water, vernal pool, whatever that's slow moving can harbor these guys. I have them in my yard, in my vernal pool. And they're just cool. Whoop. There we go. So anyway, here in North Quabbin, we have two potential mole salamanders. The top one is called the Jefferson salamander, and I've only known it from 2 or 3 sites in the North Quabbin. It's quite rare. If you go across the Connecticut River up into Coleraine and Shelburne Falls area, they're much more abundant over there on that side of the valley, which happens through a lot of different things. But oftentimes they'll be in vernal pools. We'll see the egg masses. These are spotted salamander egg masses. And the Jefferson salamander egg masses tend to be more linear and oftentimes attached to a stick on a linear landscape. So something to be looking for. And these can get pretty good size. I mean, these can go 6 inches or better. And, this is what I look for at the end of March when we have 40-degree days with a good rainstorm after dark. You'll find us out there looking for these things. But here's my backyard with my grandkids. This is kind of like my Easter tradition. I put a trap in the pond and we sample for what's going on. And this is telling me that my vernal pool is being very active and productive. And then I actually have a couple of boards, pieces of plywood out in the yard, and it's nice to see the tiny spotted salamanders that have come out of that pond and heading to the forest. And we only see them in the early spring when they're doing this, and then sometimes when the young ones are heading back to the forest, you might come across a few more. This is an immature great tree frog. This very green looking little frog. When they first come out, they're not much bigger than your thumbnail, really tiny. And then as they get bigger, they turn gray. But at this phase, they're really kind of like an iridescent or a lime green kind of color. It's pretty bright. But here we go with some of the stuff. And again, the frogs of the early April, late March, early April is the wood frog. And then the spring peeper are very common at that period. And you can see I was laying in the rain on South Athol Road taking this picture at eye level. That's when I used to be able to get up quickly from traffic. But the gray tree frog, remember we saw that green phase earlier, and this is more likely. And they can actually change the skin color to mimic their surroundings, to actually camouflage in place. Pretty cool stuff. And this is American toad, calling away and the trilling away that they do. So turtles are another one of the things I just love turtles. And we're seeing less of some of these. This is a spotted turtle. And I've been watching one group, not far from here that, when I first started watching them probably 20 years ago, there was 8 or 10 of these turtles in this pool. And this last year I only saw one of the spotted, and there was probably 40 or 50 of the painted in the same pool. And I'm wondering if the painteds aren't just pushing the spotted turtles out just from the sheer numbers involved. But this is the painted turtle is here. This is our most common turtle that we see basking. The snappers, again, one of the most dangerous animals in Massachusetts. More people get injured by snapping turtles because they're stupid. These things bite. And, you're trying to move them across the road and they don't know you're being friendly. So you got to be very careful if you're going to move one out of the traffic. And then this one here is an interesting one. This is a musk turtle. And these guys are actually much more abundant than you would ever assume. They don't bask in the above water like the painted turtles do. They actually bask underwater. And I had a grad student took us on a field trip. We went out to Tully Pond on the causeway. And, we're all standing at the car, and she took 2 steps into the pond, reached down and picked up a musk turtle. And I'm going, wow. But I've seen a few of these. But only when they come out to go nest. So they're there, but they're basking underwater, which is very different than most of the other turtles. And they're very interesting. And actually, that grad student, she did her work down in South Belchertown, and this one pond found 400 different musk turtles, And they mark each one on the shell with these little codes and everything, so she knew which ones they were. But for an animal that's so abundant, you just never see them. This is our wood turtle. This is an endangered species in Massachusetts. This one was over at Cass Meadow. It's actually missing a leg on this side. They aren't able to pull all the way in, and sometimes a raccoon or something may get in there and actually will gnaw off a leg or something. This one survived that attack, and at least for another 10 years she was laying eggs. So we didn't see her this year, but she was there last year So it's pretty interesting, their survivability. But this, really ornate covering on the shell, very interesting, beautiful turtles. But what are the other things? Everything I love. I don't know why, I like them all. But some of these things we're not seeing much of anymore. This is your green snake, and I've only seen like about a half a dozen in the last decade or so, and I look for them. So I mean, they're really not very easy to find. We may find this on the mass watch list at some point. Again, when you think about it, back when I was young, there were a lot more farm fields and a lot more other grassy habitats that now have sprung up houses, and that habitat has really gone away. We went from many dairy farms and stuff around here to practically none. So that whole habitat has really disappeared that they're used to. So we still find them, but again, it's really not very often. And this is the milk snake. And again, this is one that's relatively common, and it's usually oftentimes around your houses. I've had people freak out and call me, and I love to go pick them up because, you go, oh yeah, it's just a milk snake. But, if they're in your cellar or in your kitchen, it's not really as friendly a time as most people, even my wife thinks that most of the animals should stay outside. There's our common garter snake. This is probably the most common of our small snakes, and we see them everywhere. And we have a bunch of little snakes, too, that I just really, we don't get to see very often unless you really are looking for them. This is the red-bellied snake. If you see the belly right here, it's bright red, kind of reddish-orange, and it has a little patch of brown at the base of the head. This is the ring-necked snake. If you can get this, the names are pretty good. Red belly, ring neck. The IDs are pretty easy. This is the DeKay's brown snake. Again, not a lot of color, but he is brown. And again, these things are small. You see how they are in my hand. And you often can find them under piles of wood around your yard, or you pick up some cardboard or something, and they'll be hiding under there to thermoregulate. And then down here is our water snake. It's probably the most misidentified snake. I get pictures all the time, and they think it's a water moccasin or a cobra or something, and it's a water snake. And they're really, the one thing you have to know about, they're not venomous or anything, but they'll bite. It's like, if you get grabbed by something, you might bite them too. So, if you don't pick them up, they won't bite you. It's a good rule of thumb. And this is a black racer. There's a spot that we used to go to back 23 years ago, and when I first went there was probably 50 of these snakes in the pines. It was like really eerie, because you'd be walking through and there'd be snakes hanging from the branches and stuff. We don't find that anymore. They've been, persecuted by unknowing, unreasonable people, but we still have a few left, and they're really wonderful to observe. This is how I survey for snakes. I use boards, both wooden and metal. And again, the snakes are thermoregulating. So you put them out in a field clearing like this, and the snakes will gravitate to under the boards. On a cooler day, they may be under the metal boards. On a warmer day, under the wooden boards. And you can actually sample pretty good. Many of the pictures that you've seen were taken after I found them under my boards, under my snake boards. March 31st is my birthday, and it's my annual snake day. This is the time when the snakes are just coming out. Hopefully the weather's reasonable. This picture right here I took with your late husband Ron, and I were on this trip. This is a ribbon snake. And you tell the ribbon snake by this little white patch in front of its eye, and then just the gorgeous colors. It looks somewhat like a garter snake, but really quite a bit different and 10 times more beautiful. And they like to hang around wetlands. You find them oftentimes near beaver ponds or vernal pools, but beautiful little snakes. And again, they're not big, you know, they're not, certainly not ferocious. One of my favorite snakes is the hognose. And we're fortunate in the North Quabbin here. We have several populations, particularly in the northern side of Quabbin. And you rarely see them. I know the people that were doing bird surveys in Montague actually saw most of them as they were sitting still, and the snakes would find them as they were sitting very still for a long period of time. But this is the hognose snake. And if you disturb a hognose snake, first it plays dead, and then it kind of like does all things like it wants to throw up and go all kinds of gyrations to make you make you think it's dead and you go away. But I was very fortunate to get a call from Mike Phillips, who's a photographer from Orange. And I was at a staff meeting in Belchertown at the DCR building, and he sent this picture to a picture like this to my phone. And I saw it, and I texted back to him, "Where are you?" And he was up in gate 29. So I told my boss, I says, "I got to go. Check this out." And we actually went out there and found, emerging from the soil, about 20 of these, and they were about 5 or 6 inches long. And as they came out of the ground, they immediately shed their skin and were pristine looking right off the bat. And they were coming out in a linear path. So the parent snake had laid her eggs in a line underground in the shoulder of the road. And so they were popping up all over the place. And it was kind of neat because the sun was shining on the side of the road, and then a cloud came by and they stopped, and it was just got no more sun. So, it was nothing. We waited another half an hour, nothing happened. So I went back the next day with the DCI biologist, about 8 o'clock in the morning. The sun came back out, shone on the side of the road, and we saw more of them emerge. So they were very, very attuned to that bright sunlight and the warmth of the sun to get them motivated to come out. And then they just kind of disappeared into the underbrush, but cool. So we can't forget the charismatic megafauna, I mean, the moose are still, a few of them are still left. They probably peaked in population around 2008 or so in the area. And we're fortunate to still have a few. They don't like warm temperatures. There's, like anything above 50 degrees start to give them stress. But we still have a few. And any day you see a moose is a good day. And they're reproducing up here. This is, again, in North Quabbin at a beaver pond. And there's the mother moose with 2 calves. And they were about the size of German shepherds at that point, So we got to appreciate all the different things that are happening around us. And when I grow up, I'm going to start learning about other fish, I haven't gone on this route yet, but I've started. We have all kinds of different kinds of dace and things and stuff, and I'm going to learn more about them. So, in a future talk, we'll have a fish talk. But for now, that's who we are. And I just think about paying it forward. One thing I've always thought about paying it forward to children, but we just had a lecture by Doug Tallamy the other night. It's on our Athol Bird Nature Club website. And Doug was really emphasizing that we really should be reaching out to people that are adults and retirees, because they've already got time, they've already got kind of, they're comfortable in their existence and can actually do stuff about planting things in your yard and doing other good projects. So we don't want to save it all just for the kids, but bring them along. This is the stuff that makes a future entomologist or a scientist happen. And that's at Riceville Dam, looking at dragonflies. And this is a plume moth that I actually took at a butterfly count day down at Watusa Reservoir on a dogbane blossom. If you know what a dogbane blossom is, it's like a 1/4 inch. So this is not a very big animal. And it was the only lepidoptera I think we saw that day because it was raining. But other than that, you always find something to look at. So that's it. So I'll be happy to take any questions or answer any ideas or whatever. So,
I have a question, Dave.
sure.
What's the best way to move the snapping turtle if you saw it in the middle of the road? You need to get to the.
Yeah, you know, you pick it up way in the back. It's the head can snap around, you know what I mean? So it's, you know, you're pretty far back on the shell. And, you know, some people use a snow shovel or something like that to help. But they're dangerous, you know what I mean? So you really need to be very careful when you're doing it.
One thing about snappers, if they're in the pond that you're swimming in, they won't bite you because they don't feel defensive there. They're safe to swim with, but don't mess with them on the road.
Yeah. I remember I grew up on Tully Dam, and we used to swim sometimes at the outfall of the dam. There was a nice little hole where the water comes out of the tunnel, and there was trout in there, you know, and I'm swimming around in there, and I'm looking, and there's like these chunks out of the back of several of the trout. And I'm going, And then I realized, as I looked around further, there was a big snapping turtle, you know, sitting there. And as long as you don't stand on them, you're okay, you know. But I didn't swim there a lot after that, you know.
Don't blame you.
Yes.
Dave, I have one question about the carnivorous butterfly.
Yeah, the harvester.
Yeah, so it doesn't have mouth parts, it just has the.
Right. Yeah, but the larvae do. You know, the larval caterpillars, you basically have the mouth parts that eat the aphids, and the adults are sucking on the sap from the aphid secretions, the honeydew. Yeah. So they're definitely, you know, animal-based feeding. Yes.
Dave didn't brag about that picture of the female laying eggs and the aphids. That was so special that it got shown in a major museum's display.
Wow, great.
Yeah, it's actually at the Bronx Zoo and the river exhibit at the Bronx Zoo.
That was a biggie.
Yeah. So yeah, no, there's not many photographs of them actually in action. You know. Yes.
When are your Ethelbert and Nature Club meetings?
We meet the second Wednesday of the month, September through May, and then I'll have special programs on the fourth Sunday of the month. And July and August, we have programs every Sunday afternoon in July and August. So,
Field trips.
and we have field trips anytime, whatever. And you know, if you have an interest in something specific, I bet we know someone that knows something about it. So we have plant people, we have herp people, and bug people, and bird people, and so you know, whatever you're interested in, we're more than willing to explore it. You know, we have a geology group. You know, we sometimes will do astronomy. You know, we just can't focus. Yes.
I was rigging acorns last week and
Mm-hmm.
had a big pile of them, so I got on my knees and started scooping them up with my hands. And what I used to call night crawlers as a child, it just came out of the ground.
Okay, yeah, because of the moisture that the acorns are providing. You know, the other thing you look for in the acorns is there's actually a little beetle that pokes a hole in the acorn, and its larva feeds on the acorn, so that it eats the inside of it. But yeah, I mean, any of those times that you're getting, you know, where you get something where the moisture gets trapped there, that's what the night crawlers are kind of gravitated to, you know. Yeah. Yeah.
Are they night crawlers? I had snake worms in my yard a couple of years ago.
What you have?
I had what they call snake worms.
Okay.
That's like a night crawler, but they're more active when you put them on a hook and throw them in
Jumping
the
worms.
water.
It could be jumping worms, you know, which are an invasive worm. Actually, all of our worms are not native to here. You know, the glacier pushed them out, you know, when the glacier scraped everything down to bedrock. And, you know, fishermen brought them back, you know. And some of them are quite invasive and can actually eat the duff layer of the forest, you know, which is, you know, gathers up, you know, the nutrients and stuff that would go back into the ground. But anyway, yeah, we've played a lot with bringing stuff here from other parts of the world. We're really good at it. Some of the stuff we don't want to have here. The spongy moth, gypsy moth thing is one. We're looking at emerald ash borer that's taking a big hit on our ash trees right now. We've got, everything from Dutch elm disease to whatever. So the thing is again, think about native plants, think about not bringing stuff from other parts of the country. We don't want to move firewood from one part of the country to the next. If you're going to be burning, get the wood locally so we're not transporting these egg masses from one part to another. The new kid on the block is the lantern fly, and it's as close as Fitchburg and Springfield to us now. So it's a very devastating to most of your fruit trees and any of the things in the prunus group. You know what I mean? So really don't be bringing stuff that we shouldn't be. And think about native plants. That's all I can say, because that's what the insects and the animals that live here, that's what they evolved with. And that's what the healthiest way to go about it. So, all right.
I wonder if his gathering the acorns had the same effect as using a rattlesnake, the noise it would make, might bring the worms up. I've seen a lot of different things about how to get night crawlers, and one of them is to do vibrations on the soil to make them come up. You know what I mean? And Getting acorns might have done that. So they-
might have done that. Yeah, because they do. They respond to that, the vibration. Yeah.
So the fisherman's stonefly, that's a dragonfly, is it?
The stoneflies are different. Yeah, there's a whole nother group. And there's, when I was learning my aquatic insect stuff, I have several fly tying books that actually tell you what you're trying to mimic. You know what I mean? And the stoneflies, again, do a lot of basically the same thing, oftentimes a lot more abundantly. If you look on the Miller's River and some of those rocks, they're just covered with stoneflies. But yeah, so they're cool, but there's a whole nother
But they're a
totally different group,
Right.
and I know nothing about them. Yeah, good. All right, well, if there's any other questions, I'm here, and thank you all for coming.